Velthar stood by the viewing window of Meridian 7, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. His silver skin caught the starlight, making the patterns on his face glow softly. He was a Quillarian, a species that had lived in peace for 10,000 years. War was something they only read about in ancient history files. Violence was a concept so foreign to his people that they had no word for it in their modern language. Today was important. The humans were coming. Velthar had studied the human files for months. They were a young species, barely 300 years into space travel. Their homeworld, Earth, was a blue and green planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. The Galactic Coalition had watched them for 50 years before finally agreeing to let them join as probationary members. The decision had caused arguments among the 12 species of the Coalition. Some thought humans were too primitive. Others worried they were too unpredictable. But the humans had asked politely, followed all the rules, and shown they could build impressive technology. So the council agreed to give them a chance. A human ship appeared in the distance. It looked different from other ships Velthar had seen. Coalition vessels were smooth and elegant, designed for comfort and efficiency. The human ship was blocky and thick, with heavy plating covering its hull. It looked like it was built to take damage rather than avoid it. "They certainly have an interesting design philosophy," said Kren, another diplomat standing beside Velthar. Kren was a Metharian, a species that looked like floating jellyfish made of light. Why would anyone build a ship that expects to be hit? Velthar didn't have an answer. He watched the ship dock with the station, its movements precise and controlled. An hour later, he stood in the greeting hall with other Coalition representatives. The doors opened and 3 humans walked in. The first was a man named Hyun-sik, a captain in the human military. He wore a dark blue uniform with strange patches on the shoulders. His face was calm and unreadable, his dark eyes scanning the room carefully. He moved like he was always ready for something to happen. The second was Yuna, a lieutenant. She was shorter than Hyun-sik, with her black hair pulled back tightly. She smiled at the assembled diplomats, but Velthar noticed her eyes never stopped moving. She was watching everything. The third was Day, the cultural ambassador. He was friendlier than the other 2, waving at the group and grinning widely. "Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be here. We've been looking forward to this for a long time." The greeting ceremony was formal but pleasant. Velthar used his telepathic abilities to sense the humans' emotions, as was his custom when meeting new species. What he felt confused him. Day's emotions were easy to read: excitement, curiosity, happiness. But underneath there was something else. A constant awareness, like he was always watching for danger even while smiling. Yuna felt friendly and professional, but beneath that was a river of disciplined focus. She was relaxed but ready to act in an instant. Hyun-sik was the strangest. His emotions were locked down, controlled. Velthar could barely sense anything from him. It was like the human had built walls in his own mind. The only feeling that leaked through was a deep, quiet watchfulness. These humans were peaceful in their actions, but something about them felt wrong, like predators pretending to be prey. Over the next few days, Velthar's job was to help the humans settle into their quarters on the station. He showed them where things were, explained how the Coalition worked, and answered their many questions. The humans were polite and grateful. They thanked him repeatedly and seemed genuinely interested in learning about other species. But they had habits that disturbed Velthar. Every morning they exercised, not gentle movement like other species did for health, real hard exercise. They ran until they were breathing heavily. They lifted heavy objects repeatedly. They practiced hand-to-hand fighting techniques in their quarters. When Velthar asked why they did this, Hyun-sik simply said, "We need to stay ready." "Ready for what?" Velthar asked. Hyun-sik looked at him for a long moment. "Whatever comes." The humans also spent 2 hours each day in what they called combat drills. Velthar watched through a window as they practiced using weapons, coordinating movements and running through scenarios that involved fighting and defending positions. The other Coalition species found this disturbing. The Metharians complained that it was barbaric. The Quillarians worried about having such violent beings among them. But the council had agreed to let humans join, so they said nothing directly to the humans themselves. One evening, Velthar invited the 3 humans to dinner in the station's garden level. It was a peaceful place with plants from dozens of worlds, soft lighting and gentle music playing in the background. Day loved it. He walked among the plants asking about each one, genuinely fascinated. Yuna sat quietly, seeming to enjoy the peace. Hyunsik stood by a railing looking out at the stars. Velthar approached him. "Do you like the garden?" "It's beautiful," Hyunsik said. "Peaceful." "We believe peace is the natural state of intelligent beings," Velthar said. "Violence is an illness that cultures grow out of as they mature." Hyunsik turned to look at him. "Is that what you think we are? Immature?" Velthar hesitated. "I think you are young. Your species still remembers war. You'll outgrow it." Hyunsik smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Maybe, I hope so." He looked back at the stars. But hope isn't a strategy. Before Velthar could ask what he meant, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Everyone rushed to the command center. The screens showed something appearing at the edge of sensor range. Ships, hundreds of them. They moved in a way that wasn't natural, flowing together like a school of fish or a swarm of insects. The Vrix had arrived. Velthar had heard of them in old records. The Vrix were a hive mind, a species that consumed everything in its path. They had disappeared into deep space thousands of years ago. Everyone thought they were extinct or had left the galaxy. They were wrong. The commander of the station, a wise old Quillarian named Tesh, called an emergency session. All the coalition representatives gathered, their faces showing fear. They had no military. They had no weapons. The coalition had never needed them. "What do we do?" asked one diplomat. "We could try to communicate," suggested another. "We need to evacuate," said a third. Everyone was talking at once, voices rising in panic. No one had answers. The coalition had built itself on peace and cooperation. They had no experience with threats like this. Then Hyunsik stood up. The room fell quiet. "The human fleet is 3 days away," he said calmly. "We have 17 ships in the sector. If you give us permission, we can engage the Vrix and buy time for evacuation." Tesh looked at him. "Engage? You mean fight them?" "Yes, but you'll be destroyed. There are hundreds of their ships." Hyunsik's face didn't change. "Maybe, but we'll slow them down. That's what matters." Velthar felt something cold move through his body. The human wasn't scared. He was offering to die calmly as if it was a normal thing. "Why would you do this?" Velthar asked. Hyunsik looked at him. "Because someone has to, and we're the only ones who can." The council debated for an hour. Finally, they agreed. They had no choice. As the humans left to prepare, Velthar followed them. "Wait," he called. Hyunsik turned. "I don't understand you," Velthar said. "You talk about dying like it means nothing." "It means everything," Hyunsik said quietly. "That's why we're willing to do it." Velthar watched them walk away, and for the first time in his long life he felt something new and terrible growing inside him. Fear. The council assigned Velthar to observe the human fleet. His job was to document everything they did, to record their tactics and strategies for future coalition records. He didn't want to go. The fear from yesterday had settled into his bones like ice, but duty was duty. So he packed his things and took a shuttle to the human command ship. The ship was called Indomitable. Even the name was aggressive. When Velthar stepped aboard, he immediately felt the difference from coalition vessels. Everything was metal and function. The corridors were narrow with heavy doors every 50 meters. Signs everywhere pointed to emergency stations, weapons lockers, and medical bays. A young human woman met him at the airlock. She had short black hair and wore the same dark blue uniform as the others. Her name tag read Hana. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said with a crisp salute. "I'm Sergeant Hana. I'll take you to the Admiral." As they walked through the ship, Velthar saw humans rushing in every direction. They moved with purpose, calling out to each other, checking equipment. The ship hummed with activity, and everyone, he noticed, was armed. Even the crew members doing maintenance work had weapons on their belts. "Why does everyone carry weapons?" Velthar asked. Hana glanced at him. "In case of boarding. If enemies get on the ship, everyone fights. Even the engineers? The medical staff?" "Everyone," Hana said simply. They reached the bridge and Velthar met Admiral Tae-sung. She was a woman in her 50s with gray streaks in her black hair. Her eyes were sharp and calculating. When she looked at Velthar, he felt like she was reading his entire life story in seconds. "Welcome, Observer Velthar," she said. Her voice was firm but not unkind. "I understand you're here to document our methods." "Yes, Admiral. The Council wants to understand how you'll defend against the Vrix." Taesung nodded. Then you'll have a full view of everything we do. I've assigned you quarters near the bridge. You can move freely, ask questions, and observe any operation. She paused. I only ask that you stay out of the way during combat. Of course, Velthar said. Over the next 2 days, as the fleet moved toward the Vrix swarm, Velthar watched the humans prepare. What he saw disturbed him more each hour. In the training room, soldiers practiced fighting in ways that made Velthar sick. They learned how to hurt, how to kill, how to survive injuries that should be fatal. One drill involved soldiers treating wounded teammates while under simulated fire. Velthar watched a medic named Young pull a man to safety, apply bandages and give injections, all while alarms blared and lights flashed to simulate combat conditions. Why do you practice being hurt? Velthar asked Young during a break. Young wiped sweat from his face and smiled. Because we will be hurt. Better to know what to do when it happens. But if you know you'll be hurt, why fight at all? Young's smile faded. He looked at Velthar with an expression the Quillarian couldn't read. Because if we don't, who will? In the weapons bay, Velthar watched soldiers checking their equipment. Each one carried a primary weapon, a secondary weapon, a knife, and something they called grenades. The knives especially confused him. Your energy weapons are advanced, he said to Sergeant Hana, who was sharpening her knife on a whetstone. Why do you need such a primitive tool? Hana held up the blade, examining its edge. Energy weapons fail. They run out of power, get damaged, or stop working in some environments. A knife always works, and she looked at him. A knife is reliable. When everything else fails, you still have something to fight with. But to use it, you'd have to be so close to your enemy. Yes, Hana said, going back to sharpening. We would. The thought made Velthar's skin crawl. Fighting hand-to-hand, close enough to see your enemy's face, close enough to die yourself. What kind of species trained for that? On the second day, Velthar attended a briefing in the strategy room. Admiral Taesung stood at the head of a table covered in holographic displays. Captains from other ships appeared as projections around the table. Hyunsik and Yuna were there in person, along with a young woman named Ari who was apparently one of their best pilots. Taesung brought up a map of the approaching Vrix swarm. There were so many red dots that they looked like a solid mass. Current analysis suggests the swarm will reach colony threshold 9 in 40 hours, Taesung said. 4 million civilians live there. We need to give them time to evacuate. How long do we need to hold? Asked one of the captains. 36 hours minimum. 48 would be better. The captains looked at the display. The human fleet had 17 ships. The Vrix had hundreds, maybe thousands. Projected losses? Another captain asked. Taesung's face didn't change. 40 to 60% of our fleet. Maybe more. The room was silent. Velthar felt his heart's hammering. She said it so calmly. Half their ships destroyed. Thousands of people dead, and they were still going to do it. If we position the heavy cruisers here, Hyunsik said, pointing at the map, we can create a kill box, force them to come through a narrow approach. We'll take heavy fire, said another captain. Yes, but it'll slow them down. Every hour we hold is another transport full of civilians getting clear. They discussed tactics for 2 hours. Velthar listened, growing more disturbed. They talked about casualties like they were talking about damaged equipment. They planned for their own deaths with the same calm as planning a meal. At one point, Yuna suggested a tactic that would require her ship to hold position against overwhelming fire. My destroyer can take it for maybe 20 minutes before shields fail, she said. And after that? Taesung asked. We ram the largest Vrix ship we can reach. Use the reactor detonation to take out as many as possible. Taesung considered this, then nodded. Only if there's no other option. I want you alive, Lieutenant. Understood, Admiral. But if it comes to it, I'm ready. Velthar stood up, his composure breaking. How can you talk like this? You're planning to die. The humans turned to look at him. Their expressions were patient, like teachers with a confused child. We're planning to win, Taesung said. Some of us will die doing it. That's the price, but why pay it? Why not retreat? Why not negotiate? The Vrix don't negotiate, Hyunsik said. They consume. If we retreat, 4 million people die. Better them than you? Velthar regretted the words as soon as he said them. Taesung stood and walked around the table to face him. She wasn't angry. She looked sad. Better us, she said quietly. We chose this. We volunteered. We trained for it. Those civilians didn't ask to be in danger. They deserve protection. That's what we do. But you could die, Velthar said weakly. Everyone dies eventually, Ari said from her seat. She was young, barely 20. She should have been scared. She wasn't. The question isn't whether we die. It's what we die for. That evening, Velthar couldn't sleep. He wandered the ship's corridors, watching humans prepare. In the mess hall, soldiers shared meals and told stories. They laughed. They joked. They hugged each other goodbye, just in case. In the chapel, he found Young sitting alone. The medic had his eyes closed, hands folded. I didn't know humans had religious practices, Velthar said. Young opened his eyes and smiled. Some of us do. Some don't. I like to take a moment before battle. Centers me. Aren't you afraid? Terrified, Young admitted. Every time. Fear is natural. It keeps us alive. Then why fight? Young stood up. Because being afraid and doing nothing is worse than being afraid and doing something. Fear is just an emotion. It doesn't control us. He put a hand on Velthar's shoulder. You'll understand soon. That night, lying in his assigned quarters, Velthar tried to understand these humans. They knew death was coming. They prepared for it. They accepted it. But they didn't give in to it. His people had lived in peace because they had never faced real threats. They had never needed to be brave because they had never needed to be afraid. These humans had faced threats. They carried fear with them every day, and they chose to face it anyway. Velthar realized something that made his skin go cold. The terror he felt wasn't from the Vrix. It was from the humans themselves. What kind of species walked calmly toward death? What kind of beings accepted destruction as the price of protecting strangers? In the morning, the alarm sounded. The Vrix were here. It was time for Velthar to learn the answer. The bridge of the Indomitable erupted into controlled chaos. Officers called out readings from their stations. Holographic displays showed the Vrix swarm approaching like a red tide. Velthar stood against the back wall, trying to stay out of the way as humans rushed to their positions. Admiral Tae-sung sat in her command chair, her face carved from stone. All ships, battle formation Delta 7. Cruisers to the front, destroyers on the flanks. Fighters launch when they reach weapon range. Admiral counting 1,200 Vrix ships, an officer reported. 1,200 against 17. The numbers were insane. Helm, position us at the center line, Tae-sung ordered. We're the anvil. Let them break against us. The fleet moved into formation. Through the view screen, Velthar saw the other human ships taking their positions. They looked so small against the backdrop of stars. So fragile. Enemy in range in 3 minutes, another officer announced. Velthar's telepathic senses were overwhelmed. He could feel the emotions of everyone on the bridge. Fear was there, yes, but it was controlled, pushed down, buried under layers of training and discipline. Above it all was a fierce determination that burned like a sun. These humans were afraid. They just didn't let it stop them. 2 minutes to contact. Yuna's voice came over the communication channel from her destroyer. Shadow Squadron in position, Admiral. Ready on your mark. Hold position, Lieutenant, Tae-sung said. Wait for them to commit. Velthar watched the distance shrink on the displays. His hearts were racing. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee, to get away. But the humans around him were calm, focused. 1 minute. Ari's voice crackled through, full of energy. Razor Flight ready to fly. Just give the word. Patience, Razor Flight, Tae-sung said. The Vrix ships filled the view screen now. They were biological, grown rather than built. Covered in armored plates and bristling with organic weapons. They moved together, perfectly coordinated by the hive mind controlling them. They're beautiful in a terrible way, Hyun-sik said quietly beside Velthar. You think so? Velthar whispered. Beauty and horror aren't opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing. 30 seconds. Tae-sung stood up. All ships weapons free. Engage at will. For the coalition. For the coalition. The bridge crew echoed. Then hell began. The human ships opened fire. Energy beams and projectiles streamed across space. The Vrix returned fire, their bioweapons launching acid globs and bone spears. The first impacts rocked the Indomitable. Velthar grabbed a rail to keep from falling. Shields at 80%, someone reported. Port batteries focus on the command clusters, Tae-sung ordered. Take out their coordination nodes. Velthar watched in horror as the battle unfolded. A Vrix ship exploded under concentrated fire from 3 human cruisers. But 2 more took its place. The enemy swarmed forward, trying to overwhelm through sheer numbers. Then Ari's fighter squadron launched. 20 small craft shot out from the carriers, dancing between the larger ships. They moved impossibly fast, dodging weapons fire, striking at weak points. Velthar watched Ari's fighter spin through a gap barely wider than her craft, destroy a Vrick ship's weapon port, and loop away before return fire could hit her. "This is Razor Leader." Ari's voice came through, breathless with excitement and fear. "We're in their formation. It's crowded in here." "Razor Flight, pull back," Taesung ordered. "Negative, Admiral. We can do more damage from inside their swarm." Another impact shook the Indomitable. The lights flickered. Shields at 40%, the battle raged on. Minutes felt like hours. The human fleet was holding, but barely. Every ship showed damage. Then one of the human destroyers took a direct hit to its engines. It started to spin out of control. "This is Captain Jinho of the Dauntless," a voice said over the comm. "We've lost engines and half our weapons. Shields failing." Velthar watched the view screen in horror. Vrick ships moved to surround the damaged destroyer like predators circling wounded prey. "Dauntless, fall back," Taesung ordered. "Can't, Admiral. Engines are gone." A pause. "It's been an honor." "Jinho, wait." The Dauntless suddenly accelerated on emergency thrusters, driving straight into the center of the Vrick's formation. Its remaining weapons fired continuously. Then its reactor went critical. The explosion took out 15 Vrick ships. Velthar felt his legs give out. He slid down the wall to sit on the floor. They had just killed themselves. Deliberately, calmly, over 200 humans gone in an instant. But the fight continued. No one on the bridge stopped to mourn. They kept working, kept fighting. Shields at 20%. Hull breach on Deck 7. Medical teams responding. Then the Indomitable shook more violently than before. Alarms blared. Something had latched onto the ship's hull. "Boarders!" Hyunsik snapped. "They're cutting through the port airlock." "Sergeant Hana, repel boarders," Taesung ordered. Deck 7, Section 3. "On it, Admiral." Velthar's telepathic senses suddenly exploded with sensation. He could feel Hana and her squad moving through the corridors, running toward the breach. He felt their grim determination, their controlled fear, their readiness to kill or be killed. The Vricks broke through. Velthar's senses showed him the scene as clearly as if he was there. The aliens that poured through were nightmares made flesh, armored monsters with razor claws and acidic blood. They filled the corridor, screeching with rage. Hana's squad opened fire. The energy weapons cut down the first wave, but more came. "Too many. Squad 2, fall back to Checkpoint Alpha," Hana ordered. "We'll hold them at the junction." Velthar felt the battle through Hana's emotions. She was scared, so scared, but she didn't run. She stood at that junction, firing her weapon until it overheated. Then she grabbed her backup weapon. When that ran empty, she pulled out her knife. A Vrick's warrior came at her, massive and snarling. She dodged under its claws and drove her knife into its throat. Its acid blood burned her arm. She didn't stop. She pulled the knife free and stabbed again, and again more of her squad fell. The corridor became a slaughterhouse. But they held the line. They wouldn't let the Vricks reach the crew quarters beyond. Velthar was crying. He didn't realize it until he tasted salt on his lips. He was feeling every death, every sacrifice, every moment of pain through his telepathic connection, and he couldn't look away. "Hull breach sealed," someone reported. "Boarders eliminated." "Casualty report from Deck 7, another officer said quietly. "Sergeant Hana's squad, 8 killed. 4 wounded. The sergeant is alive but in critical condition. 8 more humans dead, fighting in corridors, holding a line against nightmares, protecting their ship, protecting Velthar." The space battle continued. Hours passed. The human fleet was battered and bleeding. 3 more ships were lost, but the Vricks were pulled back, regrouping. "They're withdrawing," Hyunsik said, studying the displays. "How much time did we buy?" Taesung asked. 24 hours, Admiral." "Not enough. They'll regroup and hit us again." "Then we fight again," Hyunsik said simply. Velthar stood on shaking legs. "How many died?" The bridge was quiet for a moment. An officer checked her console. "Current casualties. 10,347 dead. 15,000 wounded. Over 10,000 humans had died in just a few hours." Velthar's mind couldn't process it. "And you call this a victory?" he asked, his voice breaking. Taesung turned to look at him. Her eyes were filled with grief, but her voice was steady. 4 million civilians are still evacuating. Every hour we hold is another transport that escapes. Every life we lose saves hundreds of others." She paused. "Yes, this is a victory. A costly one. but a victory. That night, Velthar visited the medical bay. He needed to understand. He needed to see with his own eyes. The bay was chaos. Medical staff rushed between beds, treating dozens of wounded. The smell of burned flesh and blood filled the air. Young, the medic he'd spoken with before, was working on a patient with terrible burns. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, applying treatments, adjusting equipment. Velthar found Hana in one of the beds. Her right arm was bandaged from shoulder to fingertips, treated for acid burns. She had cuts across her face and a broken rib. But she was alive, observer, she said when she saw him. Her voice was weak. Did we hold them? You held them, Velthar said. 8 of your squad died doing it. Hana closed her eyes. Tears ran down her cheeks. Their names were Bo Min Ki Suje Dong Seok and Wan. I will remember them. Why? Velthar asked desperately. Why do you do this? Hana opened her eyes and looked at him. Because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. Someone has to say no further. We chose to be those people. She managed a small smile. You're safe, aren't you? We did our job. Velthar left the medical bay and walked to an observation deck. He stared out at the stars, trying to understand what he'd witnessed. He had felt terror today. Real pure terror. Not just from the Vrix, but from what the humans were willing to do. They faced death calmly. They sacrificed themselves without hesitation. They killed and died with the same grim determination. What kind of species had the Coalition allied with? What kind of beings carried such darkness and such light together? And why did Velthar feel safer knowing they were here? The Vrix regrouped faster than expected. 2 days after the first battle, they launched a massive counterattack across 3 systems simultaneously. The human fleet was stretched thin, trying to defend multiple colonies at once. But worse than the military situation was the political one. The Coalition Council was falling apart. Velthar attended the emergency session from the Indomitable's communication room. Holographic projections of the 12 species representatives filled the space. Most of them looked terrified. We must negotiate, insisted the Matharian ambassador. We can offer them unpopulated systems, resources, anything to stop this attack. The Vrix don't want systems, Yunsik said quietly. He stood beside Admiral Tae-sung, who had been invited to address the council. They want biomass. They consume living things, all living things. Then we evacuate, another ambassador said. We leave this region of space entirely. Flee beyond their reach and abandon how many worlds? Tae-sung asked. How many billion lives? Better some survive than all perish, the ambassador replied. Velthar watched the council argue. Species that had lived in peace for thousands of years had no framework for this kind of threat. They had forgotten how to fight, forgotten how to sacrifice. They wanted to run, to hide, to hope the danger would pass. The humans stood silent, listening. Velthar could see the frustration on their faces, carefully controlled. Finally, Tae-sung spoke. The human fleet will continue to engage the Vrix, with or without coalition support. We volunteered for this. We'll see it through. You'll be destroyed, the Quilarian Council leader said. Your species will be wiped out. Maybe, Tae-sung agreed. But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have stood for something. She cut the connection. The holographic projections vanished. Velthar stood in the now empty room, processing what he'd heard. The coalition was considering abandonment. The humans were committed to fighting a war they couldn't win. He found Day in the observation deck later that evening. The human cultural ambassador was staring out at the stars, looking tired. Your people think we're monsters, don't they? Dai asked without turning around. Some do, Velthar admitted. Others think you're insane. What do you think? Velthar was quiet for a long moment. I think I don't understand you. Any of you, Day gestured to a seat. Sit, let me show you something. He pulled out a data tablet and handed it to Velthar. This is human history. The real history, not the edited version we gave the council. If you want to understand us, you need to see where we came from. Velthar took the tablet hesitantly. What he saw over the next hours shook him to his core. The files contained humanity's darkest moments, wars that killed millions, weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds, genocides, plagues, environmental disasters. The humans had nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times. He watched recordings of nuclear explosions. Cities turned to ash in moments, the mushroom clouds rising like harbingers of the end. He read about the unification wars, when Earth's nations fought for dominance. 3 billion people died. The planet itself was scarred, some regions still uninhabitable centuries later. He saw footage of humans hurting each other in ways that made him sick. Torture, starvation, cruelty beyond measure. "Why are you showing me this?" Velthar asked, his voice shaking. "Why would you want me to see your shame?" "Because it's not just shame," Day said quietly. "It's also triumph. Keep reading." Velthar continued through the files. And slowly, he began to see the other side of the story. For every war, there were peacemakers who spent their lives trying to stop it. For every weapon of destruction, there were scientists who worked to heal and protect. For every moment of cruelty, there were acts of stunning kindness. He read about soldiers who shielded civilians with their own bodies, doctors who stayed in plague zones to treat the sick, firefighters who ran into burning buildings, teachers who starved so their students could eat. He watched recordings of humans forming a chain to rescue someone from a flood. Strangers risking their lives for people they'd never met. He saw humans rebuilding after disasters, helping each other, refusing to give up. One file caught his attention, a recorded speech from the end of the Unification Wars, given by the woman who became Earth's first planetary leader. Her name was Jiwoo. "We have seen the worst of what we can be," Jiwoo said in the recording. Her face was scarred, her voice rough with emotion. "We have touched the edge of extinction and looked into the abyss. But we are still here. We survive not because we are the strongest or the smartest, but because we choose to endure. We choose to hope. We choose to protect each other, even when it costs us everything." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "Let our descendants remember this. Humans are capable of terrible evil, but we are also capable of incredible good. Every day we choose which one will be. That choice is what makes us human." Velthar set down the tablet. His hands were shaking. "You've survived so much," he said softly. "We have," Day agreed, "and we learned from it. Every disaster taught us something. Every war showed us the cost of hatred. Every near extinction reminded us how fragile life is. But you still fight. You still have weapons. You still prepare for war. Because we learned another lesson too," Day said. "Peace only exists when someone is willing to defend it. We tried pacifism once. We put down all our weapons, trusted that reason would solve everything. Then the Mars colonies rebelled and nearly wiped out 1 billion people before we could stop them. We learned that evil doesn't stop just because you ask nicely." He turned to face Velthar. "We don't want to fight, we hate it. Every human who dies in battle is a tragedy. But we've learned that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to stand between them and danger, even if it costs us everything." Velthar thought about what he'd seen in battle. The humans throwing themselves into danger, the soldiers dying to protect others, the grim determination to hold the line no matter the cost. "You carry your history with you," he said slowly. "All of it. The darkness and the light." "Yes," Day said. "We remember what we've done. The good and the bad. We remember the people who saved us and the ones we failed to save. We remember so we don't repeat our mistakes." He smiled sadly. "Memory is burden and gift. It weighs us down and pushes us forward." That night, Velthar couldn't sleep. He accessed the human database again, diving deeper. He read about Earth's military traditions, the codes of honor, the way they remembered their fallen. He found something called the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, a monument to warriors whose names were lost but whose sacrifice was remembered. He read the inscription. "Here lies a citizen known only to the universe but remembered by all who value freedom." He discovered that humans had holidays dedicated to remembering the dead. They built monuments, told stories, taught their children about those who gave their lives for others. They didn't forget. Ever. He found Yuna in the ship's chapel, sitting alone. She was writing something by hand on actual paper, an ancient practice. "What are you doing?" Velthar asked. She looked up, not startled. "Writing letters to the families of my crew members who died. It's my duty as their commander. They deserve more than a form message." "How many have you written?" 43 so far. 60 more to go." Her hand was cramping, but she didn't stop. "Why not use a computer?" "Because they deserve the personal touch. Their families should know that someone took time, that someone cared enough to write by hand." She finished a sentence and started another letter. "Each of these people had names, lives, dreams. The least I can do is tell their families what they meant to us." Velthar sat down beside her. "Yusna, why do you do this?" Why do humans accept death so readily? Yuna put down her pen and looked at him. We don't accept it, we hate it. Every death tears something inside us. But we've learned that some things are worth dying for. Some things are worth the cost. Like what? Like knowing that children somewhere are safe because we stood in the way. Like knowing that a species that never knew war can continue to live in peace because we fought for them. Like knowing that the universe has one less monster in it because we were brave enough to face it. She picked up her pen again. We don't die easily, observer. We don't die happily, but we die knowing it meant something. That's the difference. Velthar left her to her letters and wandered the ship. He passed the memorial wall, where names of the fallen were engraved. So many names. Some from this battle, others from conflicts stretching back centuries. A young pilot, Ari, stood before the wall, her hand pressed against a name. She was crying silently. Someone you knew? Velthar asked gently. My brother, Ari said. He died in the Mars Rebellion, saving civilians from a terrorist attack. He was 19. She wiped her eyes. I joined the fleet because of him, so his death wouldn't be for nothing. You honor him by risking your own life. I honor him by being willing to do what he did. To stand when others can't, to protect when others won't. She looked at Velthar. That's what being human means. Carrying the weight of those who came before and trying to be worthy of their sacrifice. Velthar finally understood. The terror he felt wasn't from human violence. It was from human conviction. The final battle came 3 weeks after the first attack. The Coalition Council, inspired and shamed by human sacrifice, finally committed their resources. Not soldiers, they had none, but supplies, medical support, and evacuation ships. They would help in the ways they could. The Vrix had gathered their full strength at their hive cluster in the outer dark. If humanity could destroy the Queen Mother who controlled the hive mind, the entire swarm would collapse. It was a desperate plan, a suicide mission. Every human ship that could still fly was going. That included the heavily damaged Indomitable. Velthar stood on the bridge as the fleet prepared to jump. Around him, the human crew worked with quiet efficiency. They knew what this mission meant. Most of them would not return. Admiral Tae-sung addressed the fleet. Her face appeared on every screen across every ship. To all hands, she said, what we do today will determine the fate of billions. The Vrix will throw everything at us. We will face odds that should be impossible. Many of us will die. She paused. Velthar could feel the attention of thousands of humans focused on her words. But we are here by choice. We volunteered for this. We stand between darkness and light, and we will not move. Not one step back. Not 1 inch given. We fight not because we hate what's in front of us, but because we love what's behind us. Another pause. Her eyes seemed to look through the cameras, seeing each individual person. For those who fall today, know this. You will be remembered. Your names will be spoken with honor. Your sacrifice will mean something. And for those who survive, your duty is to carry their memory, to tell their stories, to make sure the galaxy never forgets what we did here. She straightened. All ships prepare to jump. For humanity. For the Coalition. For all those who cannot fight but deserve to live in peace. The fleet jumped into the outer dark. Velthar's telepathic senses nearly overwhelmed him as they emerged into the hive cluster. The space around them was filled with Vrix ships. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. The hive structure itself was a massive organic construct, pulsing with sickly light. The battle began immediately. The Vrix swarmed the human fleet from all directions. Space became a storm of weapons fire, explosions, and desperate combat. Velthar watched Captain Hyunsik lead a boarding team through a damaged section of a Vrix biostation. Through his telepathic connection, he felt every moment. Hyunsik's squad fought through corridors filled with nightmares. They lost people at every turn. But they pushed forward, always forward, toward the station's core. The squad was down to 5 members when they reached their objective. They placed explosives, set the timer, and ran. Only 2 made it back to their shuttle before the station exploded. Hyunsik was one of them. His best friend, a man named Tae, was not. Velthar felt Hyunsik's grief like a knife. But the captain didn't stop. Couldn't stop. He pulled himself back to his feet and moved to the next objective. Ari flew her fighter through formations that should have killed her 100 times. She danced between Vrix ships, her weapons cutting through their bio-armor. She was hit twice, her fighter smoking and damaged. She kept flying. Her voice over the comm was steady despite the fear Velthar could feel radiating from her. Razor 2 is down. she reported. Razor 5 is down. Razor 7 is... Her voice broke for a moment. Razor 7 is down. Still flying, Admiral. Yuna's destroyer was at the front of the assault, taking punishment meant for the carriers behind her. Her ship was falling apart around her. Fires burned across multiple decks. Life support was failing. But she held position. Shadow actual to fleet, she transmitted. We can hold for 10 more minutes. Make it count. The Indomitable shuddered under heavy fire. The lights flickered. Alarms blared constantly. Hull breaches on decks 3, 5, and 7, an officer reported. Seal what you can. Keep us flying, Taesung ordered. Another impact. The ship lurched violently. Velthar was thrown against a console. Vrick's boarding parties on deck 8. Someone shouted. Sergeant Hana, you're up again, Taesung said. Hana's voice came through, weak but determined. She was still recovering from the last battle. On my way, Admiral. Velthar felt her moving through the ship, her squad following. Her injured arm was still weak, but she carried her weapon anyway. She reached the breach point just as Vrick's warriors poured through. The fight was brutal. Velthar experienced every moment through his telepathic connection. The fear, the pain, the desperate struggle to survive. And then something happened. Something Velthar had never felt before. A Vrick's warrior broke through Hana's squad and charged toward the bridge, toward Velthar. It was massive, its claws extended, acid dripping from its jaws. Velthar froze. His people had no word for courage because they'd never needed it. He didn't know how to fight. Didn't know how to resist, he was going to die. Then Hana was there, throwing herself between Velthar and the monster. She was injured, exhausted, should have been in medical care. But she fought anyway. She emptied her weapon into the creature. When it still came, she pulled her knife. The Vrick struck her. Its claws tore through her armor, opened terrible wounds. She fell, but she had bought enough time. The bridge security team arrived and killed the creature. Velthar dropped to his knees beside Hana. She was dying. He could feel it. Her life was bleeding away. Why? He asked, tears streaming down his face. Why did you do that? Hana smiled through the pain. Someone had to stand between you and the dark. She coughed, blood on her lips. Tell them. I held the line. Young arrived with medical equipment, moving fast despite his own injuries. He worked frantically, trying to save her. But there was too much damage, I'm sorry, Young said quietly. I'm so sorry. Hana's eyes found Velthar one last time. Remember me, she whispered. Then she was gone. Velthar knelt there, this peaceful being who had never known violence, holding the hand of a warrior who had died protecting him. And he understood. Finally, completely, he understood. The terror he had felt was not fear of human violence. It was awe at their capacity for sacrifice. It was the stunning realization that some beings would give everything, their lives, their future, their very existence, so that strangers could be safe. Around him, the battle continued. Yuna's destroyer finally failed. Velthar felt her last moments as she redirected all power to engines and drove her dying ship into the largest Vrick's command vessel she could reach. Remember me, she transmitted, echoing Hana's words. The destroyer's reactor detonated. The explosion was beautiful and terrible. It took out the command ship and 7 others around it. Ari's fighter was hit by a lucky shot. She ejected, but her escape pod was damaged. She drifted in space, listening to the battle continue without her. This is Razor Leader, she said calmly. I'm out of the fight. Give them hell for me. But the breakthrough came. A human strike team, led by what remained of Hyunsik's squad, reached the Queen Mother's chamber. They fought through her guards and placed the planet cracker weapon. Charges set, Hyunsik reported. Detonating in 60 seconds. All ships clear the blast zone. The human fleet, what was left of it, turned and burned their engines at full power. They ran. Velthar felt the countdown in his bones, felt the humans' desperate hope that they had done enough. The weapon detonated, the Queen Mother died, and across the entire hive cluster, thousands of Vrick ships stopped moving. Without the guiding intelligence, the hive mind collapsed. The swarm was broken, the humans had won, but the price was devastating. 60,000 humans were dead or missing, 17 capital ships destroyed, hundreds more wounded. The fleet that limped back to Coalition space was a shadow of what had departed, but the galaxy was safe. 4 million civilians had been evacuated. The Vrick's threat was ended. Billions of lives saved because humans were willing to pay the cost. 6 months later, Velthar stood at the dedication of the Coalition's first memorial wall. It was a massive structure of black stone, listing every human name, thousands upon thousands of them. At the top, carved in letters that caught the starlight, was a simple phrase: they held the line. Representatives from all 12 coalition species attended. They stood in silence, finally understanding what these humans had done for them. Belthar gave a speech. His voice carried across the gathering. I witnessed humans in battle. I felt terror not of our enemies but of our allies. I learned that humans carry both darkness and light within them. They have capacity for terrible violence and for unimaginable sacrifice. I watched them die, not easily, not happily, but willingly. They stood between us and extinction. They held the line when we could not. They paid a price we could not comprehend. The Vrix taught us fear, but humans taught us something more powerful: that fear can be faced, that darkness can be fought, and that sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and death is someone willing to say, not one step back. He paused, looking at the names on the wall: Hana, Yuna, Tai, Bo, Min Ki, so many others. I'd never felt terror until I witnessed humans in battle, but now I've felt something else: gratitude that they fight with us, not against us. And I've learned that the greatest courage is not absence of fear, but choosing to act despite it. After the ceremony, Belthar found himself at Yuna's memorial marker. A woman stood there, young and wearing a naval uniform. She had the same facial structure as the lieutenant who had died.